2000 AD, a new year, a new millennia, the gateway to a brave new world, a threshold and a quickening. Advancement, the anthem of the newest generation. Knowledge increases faster than ever before. Change is not only expected, but coveted. A global media beams powerful images into our homes and into our minds. Science fiction pushes the limits of what is possible and what is real. And virtual reality is an illusion no longer. Knowledge, change, the media, science fiction, virtual reality, all major parts of life today, all unique to this generation, and all at the heart of end times Bible prophecy. Coincidence? Or is reality itself quickly becoming a deception? A deception that tries to obliterate the greatest promise in history, the return of Jesus Christ.
To quote Patti LaLonde, we stand at the edge of time. We live in the only generation that has ever been completely different from every other one that has gone before it. The explosion of knowledge in this generation and the things that knowledge now make possible have literally put history on fast forward, propelling us headlong into the future at breakneck speed.
Well, one of the most overlooked signs that the Bible gives concerning the last days is this idea that the last generation would see a great and unique increase in knowledge. Now, I would ask you, to what other generation could that possibly apply? If you look at every previous generation, they did build on the knowledge gained by the generation before it, but it was only a modest increase. But this generation has seen an exponential increase in knowledge. That is unique.
And it's also unique from any future generations because you can take the quantum leap from backwardness to the space age only once. It doesn't mean that there couldn't be great increases in knowledge in the future. It just means you can't have the first step ever again. Man can only land on the moon for the first time once. That's what makes this generation totally and irreplaceably unique.
But thou, O Daniel, shut up the words and seal the book, even to the time of the end. Many shall run to and fro, and knowledge shall be increased.
About this matter of the expansion of human knowledge, knowledge shall be increased. Oh, is that an index of today? From the time of Christ until 1750, knowledge, the amount of things we know, doubled one time. From 1750 to 1900, it doubled again. From 1900 to 1950, doubled again. From 50 to 60, doubled again. And now, the expansion of human knowledge, the things that we know, are going up at an exponential rate. So it's really almost straight up. And of course, the name of the game is computers, cybernetics.
The fact is, today the total of everything we know doubles in less than 2 years.
Information flow is probably at its height. Not that it's at its limit or at its maximum, but certainly historically, information flow today has far greater accessibility than ever before.
If you think about it, this whole idea of time and fast forward is probably the most overlooked portion of Bible prophecy. As I read the writings of men of God from previous generations, it was clear that they really couldn't see how one generation could suddenly be so different from everyone that went before it.
Now imagine if you could travel through time and you traveled from, say, 400 BC to about 1500 AD. I think you'd hardly notice the change. That's 1900 years with hardly any major differences. But what if you traveled from 1890 to today? You'd think your time machine had broken and you were on a different planet because the differences are just that great. And that's only a little over 100 short years. In that time, you can go from the horse and buggy to the space shuttle. It's amazing.
Time magazine writes, but the most incredible acceleration of all is in the pace of technological change. It took humanity more than 2 million years to invent wheels, but only about 5,000 years more to drive those wheels with a steam engine. The first computers filled entire rooms, and it took 35 years to make the machines fit a desk. But the leap from desktop to laptop took less than a decade. For much of this century, the mail and the telephone were the primary means of communication. Now, faxes, voicemail, and electronic mail have all come into widespread use in less than a decade. What will the next decade bring as we move into a new millennium? That's getting harder and harder to predict. Change is coming so fast that some of the most important technologies of the 21st century may now be just a sketch on a drawing board or a glimmer in the mind of a genius. Then again, the transcendent technologies may be right under our noses, on the verge of having as great an impact as the car or the telephone.
We have statistics that show computer capability, from the sense of the computer chips themselves, are able to run 2 to 4 times faster every 18 months. So 18 months from now, the computers that will be coming out, the newest processors, will be running, again, 2 to 4 times faster than the ones we have today, at the same cost.
And if you don't think that this generation is different than those before, it's too bad you can't go back and talk to people living even 100 years ago. For example, Lord Kelvin, president of the Royal Society, said in 1895 that heavier-than-air flying machines are impossible. Or Charles H. Duell, commissioner of the U.S. Office of Patents, said in 1899 that everything that can be invented has been invented. Or in 1943, Thomas Watson, chairman of IBM, said, "I think there is a world market for maybe 5 computers." Or that computer genius of today, Bill Gates, who said in 1981 that 640K ought to be enough for anybody. These aren't just country bumpkins who are saying this. These are highly educated individuals at the top of their fields.
Consider the fact that at the turn of the century, even the concept of train travel was shocking to some.
Soon railways will span the entire globe. Just imagine it. We'll be able to travel faster than ever before, at speeds of over 30 miles an hour. 30 miles an hour! And we'll be able to go virtually anywhere.
What about these metal rails? Couldn't they affect the Earth's magnetic field, and then what would we do?
So we don't think about that.
As a matter of fact, it doesn't seem like you've done much thinking at all. The Royal Society has warned that at speeds of over 30 miles per hour, the air supply in the train will be cut off, and physicians in Munich have said that people will suffer from headaches, vertigo, and even blindness.
Oh, we've taken all that into consideration.
But what if a twig or something should fall on the tracks? Have you considered that? I mean, everyone knows that if you hit a twig at 30 miles per hour, your wheels are going to shatter.
No, I don't think so.
We live in a generation in which more is happening in a day than happened in a month or a year once upon a time. We live in a generation that is characterized by an absolute kaleidoscope of activity. Wars, rumors of wars, famine, pestilence, earthquakes, poison gas in subway stations, and collapsing buildings, and all of this. And so I first of all would say it's a world of activity. But I think the thing that interests me most is the one that might be summarized by the Daniel verse that we refer to: knowledge shall be increased. The exponential expansion of human knowledge that never would have been possible just with pencils and paper and kids in school writing 2 times 2 makes 4.
Robert Fairchat of BCE Mobile in Toronto says, "We talk about the old days being November. The time for change is compressing exponentially."
We hear about the information superhighway coming upon us, where remote facts that would have taken eternities to work out and calculations beyond the human pale now can happen like that. Therefore, I ask the question, what shall we do with this amazing gift that can produce great good or great evil? And I'm filled with anticipation as to what it will do. God alone knew the numbers of the hairs on our head once upon a time, and now we can almost work that out with a computer. That's going to produce great humility or disastrous pride in the minds of men, and that's what I'm watching for.
You know, the question, what does the future hold for this technology, really should be couched in a broader term. What does the future hold for society? Because the technology is part of society, it's a component part, it's a major influence, it's a driving force in many ways, economically, and I suppose now socially and culturally. Whether you approve or disapprove is immaterial.
The world has changed in the last 50 years. All of the assumptions and rules that guided mankind for thousands of years were suddenly invalidated. Technology is a part of that, But there's something much larger at work here. Man's vision has changed. Now, nothing seems impossible. We're filled with confidence. It's almost like we're ready to take another crack at building the Tower of Babel.
And you can't forget the context in which this is occurring. The fact is, it's happening in the exact same generation that saw Israel return to her land. Now that's the key sign of the last days. So it's not just a case of us suddenly getting smart. It's a case of this explosion of knowledge happening at exactly the right time. Now, I don't care what religious view you hold. You've got to admit, that's pretty amazing.
And what's really amazing is that this all began in exactly the same year, 1948. Not only did that year see Israel return to her land, but it also saw the invention of the transistor, something key to the drastic improvement of computer technology. Without it, technology couldn't have become smaller or faster.
Of course, there's a vast difference between having knowledge and having wisdom. But in today's information age, many have confused the two. They say that since we have gained greater knowledge, we must also have grown wiser. However, Malcolm Muggeridge significantly writes, "We have educated ourselves into imbecility." Likewise, the Apostle Paul, speaking of the last days, described the people as ever learning and never able to come to the knowledge of the truth. But the scope of our knowledge isn't the only thing that's changed. We've changed as well. We've learned to accept new things the way we accept the coming of each new day. In fact, this generation seems to covet change, but that wasn't always the case. For example, in 1900, Herod's department store installed a revolutionary new device. It was called an escalator. And like this one here, it used to carry shoppers from the first floor to the second. People didn't quite know what to think of this contraption, and Herod's used to actually comfort those who would use the device by offering them a shot of brandy when they got to the top. This wasn't some sales gimmick used to advertise the store. This was actually to help the people getting off the escalator to get over the rapid increase in altitude. Obviously, people then weren't quite craving the newest invention the way we are today. No, thank you.
Well, what's really amazing today isn't so much everything that's new, although that certainly is, but the way people react to what's new. Nowadays, anything that's new has to be tried and done immediately. What do the commercials say? Just do it. And what's the complaint we always hear today? Been there, done that. Do you think 100 years ago people would be willing to pay money to tie elastics to their ankles and jump off a bridge and almost hit the ground? I don't think so. But today we live in a thrill-seeking, instant gratification world. We just naturally expect things to be better, faster, newer. So we've got to realize we've changed as well.
In our office, we have a number of computers. Some are from a few years ago when we first began our ministry, and some are newer. The other day, I had to work on one of the older ones, and I couldn't get over how slow it seemed. What else I couldn't get over was how frustrated I was becoming at having to wait for it. This slow computer used to seem incredibly fast to me, but not anymore. Now if I have to wait at all, I think something's wrong.
However, the older generation isn't approaching the new technologies with the same enthusiasm.
Come on, Grandma, what's taking so long?
I don't know what I'm doing. I never used one of these before.
Look, you just do what it tells you to. It's simple.
But what if I do something wrong? I don't want to hurt anybody. Why don't you use a real killer?
What, and actually talk to a real person?
You know, in a sense, we're now seeing the first true, real generation gap in human history. In the past, kids wore their hair differently than their parents or listened to different music. But today, they truly live in a completely different world. They're plugged in, they're online, and they're viewing this world through a lens that the older generation doesn't even know exists.
We're book people, right? We learn from books. They have no interest in learning from books anymore. They want multimedia. They want interactive things that they can learn by touching and seeing and experiencing.
The reaction to virtual reality has always been very, very positive, especially for people who have never tried it before. We've heard, wow, there's never been anything like that. I can't believe I just did that.
The new technology has been very popular among the younger crowd, if you wish. The ones who are into the video games and the computer technology of today. They're very comfortable. They're using the equipment in the sense of the ATMs. They're using the phone line services, the fax services.
I think the transition to that kind of technology and people's reluctance to adopt new technologies is diminishing over time. I mean, it pervades everything that they do, and this will just be one more aspect of the information age that becomes part of their everyday life.
Technology really is incredible. It allows us to do many things that we could never even imagine doing without it. But sometimes it does take us too far, too quickly. For example, imagine people using an X-ray machine to see if their shoes fit. That's right, the same machine that we now avoid, that spews radiation and causes cancer, and that doctors hide from in other rooms, was once used every day, in the open, in shoe stores. Anyone, including children, could slide their feet in, press a button, and voila, they could see their bones. Now, it was nothing more than a marketing gimmick, but who would have guessed that as the children laughed and wiggled their toes, they were actually being exposed to deadly radiation?
But that's just the thing. Bad things happen and then measures are taken to correct those problems. But when you're moving at the speed we are today, there's no time to stop and correct these things. I like the saying, there's an alarming increase in the number of things we know nothing about.
You know, very knowledgeable people used to think that there were limitations to all of this. For example, in 1949, Popular Mechanics magazine made the bold prophecy that computers in the future may weigh no more than 1.5 tons. This is laughable for us now, but back then I'd bet most people would have said, 1.5 tons? Are you joking? They'll never get that small.
But that's the beautiful thing about technology and virtual reality and where we are. The idea is that there are no limitations. And if we were to think that there were limitations, we wouldn't be where we are today, technologically speaking.
The fact is, as Harry Fosdick said, everything is moving so fast these days that the man who says it can't be done is generally interrupted by someone doing it.
Technology is sexy. That's what it comes down to. Technology is newsworthy. We all want to live in the future. We're all afraid of living in the present, or we're bored of it.
Today, people are used to change. We encourage it, even crave it. Unlike our friends from a scant 100 years ago, we'd go crazy without it. It's true that we live in a fast-paced world, but you have to remember that we're the ones with our foot on the accelerator, the music blaring from the top down. Perhaps it's this new attitude, even more than our exploding levels of technology and knowledge, that is the single biggest factor in thrusting us boldly but blindly into our brave new world.
You know, when you read the book of Revelation, the world it describes seems so distant, so far away, so unlike the world we live in, it almost seems like some kind of science fiction novel. So you kind of think maybe it can't happen for a long time. But in today's world, not only can and do events take place very quickly, but people move right along with them. This is the first generation in history that I believe could deal with an event like the rapture and step right into the tribulation world without having a collective heart attack.
If you think that the pace of change is fast in our world today, the Bible warns us that you ain't seen nothing yet. The prophetic passages paint a picture of a world turned on its head, a world with the most unthinkable series of events taking place, all within 3.5 short years.
The book of Revelation is about the titanic battle between God and Satan. But when you look at it from a practical view, the chronology of that compressed time is absolutely staggering. I mean, in 42 short months, the Antichrist, this great deceptive leader that arises on the world scene in the last days, sets up a world government. He sets up an integrated world economy. He brings all the world's religions divided forever into a single united world religion. He establishes a powerful and effective global army. He brings peace to the entire world. He has the temple rebuilt in Jerusalem, and he creates a global electronic identification system. Now, even for the Antichrist, the master of evil and deception, that's a lot of things to do in a very short period of time.
Each one of these tasks would normally take much longer than 3 years to do, never mind trying to do them all at the same time. But what's important to realize is that almost all of these can be seen on the horizon right now. The seeds of a world government can be seen in organizations like the European Union, NATO, and the United Nations. A world economy is coming closer through things like the World Trade Organization and increased world trade. An emerging world army can be seen in Eurocorps or the UN Army. Humanism, Eastern religions, and the New Age movement are combining to form a new type of global religion, and the technology and motives for a worldwide electronic identification system are in place right now.
But it's one thing to hear world leaders talking about the possibility of all these things happening. It's another thing altogether to have them actually happen. My point is that I think the rapture is going to serve as the ultimate trigger, changing every single thing and every point of view on this planet, and it's going to happen just like that.
The Bible does indeed picture a world stunned by the rapture and then seduced by the greatest deceiver this world has ever seen. The Antichrist then leads the world through the enormous changes that we've noted. But if he's going to do that, he's going to have to communicate with the entire world very quickly, and he's going to have to get everyone to trust and to believe in him. Once again, this is the first generation in which that is possible.
In other generations, there was no way everyone on the entire planet could even know who this guy was, never mind trust him. But today, the way is obvious, through the global mass media. In fact, it may not be going too far to say that this window on the world is quite possibly the most powerful and influential force on the planet.
Ed Turner, Executive Vice President of CNN, has said, "The news is what we say it is. I don't mean to sound arrogant, but in life, there are certain things edited out."
I will give you one example. I don't want to badmouth any television crew right now, but years ago, a famous TV chain in the United States sent a crew to the West Bank, and they bribed, and it was all documented, they bribed a young Arab boy, 12 years old, to put a tire on fire. Now I can tell you, if you would put a zoom, a television lens, through a fire, that the tire, to the smoke, you will make believe that the whole city is up in fire, but it was one tire. So the fact that you watch it on television doesn't mean that this is true. You're only watching it on television. And what you are seeing is the picture that was taken by the producer, by the cameraman, and they can do whatever they want. And you make believe that this is true. This is not true. This is the truth that they want you to see.
They're not supposed to see you guys later. You're supposed to say the words that people want to hear, like, I'm back. Oh, am I supposed to say that right now? You're supposed to say, I'm back. Man.
The media's depiction of any subject whatsoever, whether it be political, religious, or technological, has always helped to gain a greater awareness and more consciousness about what it is that they're talking about. Like this program, for example. The viewers out there today are going to watch a little bit about technology and get a glimpse into the future.
I think it can be argued that the media industries are among the least regulated industries in society today. I mean, they have an enormous amount of carte blanche and freedom to do whatever they want. And that's something we have to address a little more seriously.
One great example of the power of the media is its ability to create heroes and/or villains. It's basically understood that elections now are won or lost not so much on the candidates' platforms and ideas, but how they come across on TV.
A former nightclub crooner who controls Europe's second largest media empire, Silvio Berlusconi has invented a new brand of politics created for and by television. The video wall is to Mr. Berlusconi what the soapbox was to John Major.
A high school teacher recently told me that a grade 11 student asked who Moses was. This wasn't meant to be humorous. The student seriously didn't know who he was. But I'll bet if you asked that student who did a particular commercial or whose song is at the top of the charts, you'd get an immediate response. So our focus, our heroes, what's important to us has all radically changed. And it's done so in the one generation since TV was born.
The ability of today's media to change people's views on subjects, to control their thoughts and actions is unparalleled by anything in history.
The TV program Friends is one of the most popular shows around for both adults and children.
Excuse me, is this where the singing lady is who tells the truth?
Yeah, I guess that's me.
She's here!
Sometimes men love women, and sometimes men love men. And then there are bisexuals, though some just say they're kidding themselves. La 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 la.
Week after week, TV shows like Friends send out their messages loud and clear. Think how effective these messages are when they're coming from extremely popular people, instead of just from mom, dad, or teachers.
Entertainment is the sole value that's now sort of cherished by the students. I think that's where we could look at how all these things, the video games and all that, make us entertainers as much as teachers.
And again, there are harmful effects from advertising being directed toward children because of the extent to which it distorts their perception of reality and what they need to be happy and healthy and wholesome, loved. So their self-esteem and their perceptions of needs, wants, and desires are being distorted by these media conglomerates.
Do I have to go?
See you later. Hi, come on in, have a seat. So, Joey, you've been in a lot of trouble lately. Stealing, fighting, swearing at your parents. Can you tell me why?
No.
Well, why don't we start by looking at some of the things that you like and some that you don't. So, what kind of things do you like to do?
Watch movies.
Okay, well that's good. And what are some of your favorite movies?
Nightmare on Elm Street. I've seen it 10 times.
You're a little young for that. That's a pretty scary movie. Weren't you frightened by it?
At first I was, but then I pretended I was Freddy.
Isn't Freddy the bad guy?
As long as I'm him, I don't have to worry. He kills everyone and no one can hurt him.
The power of today's media can't be overstated, and it shouldn't be overlooked either. From the very young to the very old, from the east to the west, the media can change our views of the world. You know, Ted Turner, the founder of CNN, boasted after the fall of communism that he brought down the Berlin Wall. You know, some people laughed at that because Ted's not the most modest guy around. But I think there's at least some truth to his observation. The communists finally got a look at how the rest of the world lived through the media, and then decided that they'd had enough. Once they saw how the other side lived, there was no going back. So in essence, the media did something that wars and 40 years of a Cold War could not do.
I think that's true. And you guys, I say you guys, the media ends up being essentially the purveyor of cultural prototypes by the electronic media. As someone once pointed out, with something I didn't think was obvious, but I'm beginning to believe it's true. You realize that millions of people all over the world on portable TV sets, which are cheap now, are watching CNN and learning English. From the TV sets. Amazing phenomenon. Ronald Reagan used to say he loved television, he said, because it's the only thing that knit us together. More and more, the global world is being knit together. It's television, commercial television, that is more and more binding the world together, the news gatherers and even the salespeople. It's an amazing revolution, And that's going to change us all. It's going to change the Soviets, it's going to change us, it's going to change the way the world sees itself and does itself. We are on the brink of either a brand new world or a hell of a catastrophe, one or the other.
I think you'd simply have to watch and realize that this is part of Satan's deceptive practice, because he can get at the world through the media of the world and produce his doctrine. Of course, the media is doing it already, and that's going to continue when the electronic system comes into play.
The Bible has an incredible prophecy that's found in Revelation 11. It tells us that in this last generation, that in this time when there's a world dictator, that God will send two men who will be like Elijah or John the Baptist of old. They are going to call people to repentance, but the Bible says that after a period of 3.5 years, they will be killed by the world dictator. Then the Bible says the whole world will be astonished as they are resurrected and ascend to heaven in the sight of all men. I ask you to consider, in no other generation, in fact, even 10 years ago, it would have taken a week or two for the news of the death of these men to go from Palestine all the way to America or to China. How then, in any other time than today, with CNN and worldwide television, where the whole world watched O.J. drive down the freeways south of L.A. during his escape ride, the whole world now can watch the Olympics. The world with CNN and worldwide television, for the first time in history, could watch the death of these men, could watch their bodies unburied, and be aware of it, have a party, and then be astonished as they arose supernaturally in the sight of all men. These prophecies could not be fulfilled in any other generation.
You know, as we were working on our video, Left Behind, which depicts the world in the moments following the rapture, we were trying to think what people's first reaction might be to this unthinkable, simultaneous vanishing of millions of people off the planet. Then it hit us, and we opened the video with a man running to his television set. You know, I believe that this may well be where the Antichrist will make his appearance on the world scene. You're going to have the entire world, almost out of their minds, gathered at their television sets, trying to figure out what's happened. And then it's into this supernatural, supercharged moment that the Bible says the most powerful deceiver in world history will step onto the world stage. I think it may well be through television.
Instant celebrity is very much a phenomenon the last few years. Just ask Tonya Harding or Norman Schwarzkopf or Marcia Clark. The right person at the right time with the right media coverage can today gain instant and global recognition.
So the stage, it would seem, is set. The pieces are in place for the greatest entrance onto the world stage that mankind has ever seen. There's little doubt that today's media has the power to create heroes, bring about remarkable changes, and create a global culture. And that same power can also make the Antichrist an extremely popular figure. Popular enough to fulfill prophecy and be worshipped by the entire world. I don't think any of us can say that we haven't looked up into a night sky and marveled at the expanse of it. Where does it go? Where does it end? What's out there? Today, those questions have become all the more real. After all, the idea of ET doesn't seem quite so far-fetched now that we have our own shuttles in space. But there's something more to it than that.
I remember as a little boy watching Neil Armstrong step onto the lunar surface. I remember the first space shuttle launch. These were great times to grow up in. But I think our imaginations have been fueled by Hollywood as much as they have been by the Space Control Center in Houston. E.T., Star Trek, and much more recently Independence Day have painted such powerful images on our collective consciousness that our everyday world seems a little drab by comparison. It's created a hunger for the next big thing. The world really seems to want something big to happen.
What is happening is that more and more people are asking some of the bigger questions. Where did we come from? And where are we going? However, with society moving away from Judeo-Christian values and teachings, people are looking to ETs for answers. I don't think it would be too much to say that society today has been primed for contact.
Of course, once an idea has been planted, the human mind is capable of imagining many fantastic things. For example, I'm sure that many of us can remember being alone in a dark room. Suddenly, we begin to imagine something dark, twisted, and scaly creeping closer in the shadows, even though we're sure we're alone. Horror movies are based on our mind's ability to imagine. So too is science fiction, or even the exciting adventure of Indiana LaLonde.
One night, quite a few years ago, actually when we were teenagers, Paul and I went to see the movie Indiana Jones and the Raiders of the Lost Ark. And you know, we came out of that theater so excited, so pumped, so on fire, all we wanted to do was hop on a plane and go find that ark.
On the way home, we walked along a beach until something made us stop. Suddenly, a little ways out in the water, we could see a faint light glowing on the surface. It shimmered and moved with the water and seemed to be alive.
Full of anticipation, we waded out into the water. You know, we couldn't tell where the light was coming from. Was it coming from some source in the sky that we couldn't see, or was it coming from under the surface? So we kept going out till we were up to our waist in water, and I reached out with my toe and pushed towards the light, and it started to spin under the surface.
Peter reached down into the water, getting the rest of his clothes wet, and felt around for what was still glowing on the lake's bottom. It turned out only to be a flashlight.
So our adventure wasn't nearly as amazing as Indiana Jones's. But what was amazing was how much we wanted that glow to be something more than just a flashlight. The movie had set us up for great expectations, and our imaginations did the rest. When it turned out to be some old thing just from this planet, we were really disappointed.
The fact is that TV and movies have set most of us on edge, waiting for something to happen. Be it dinosaurs from ancient DNA, violent storms, deadly diseases, or aliens from outer space, all of us are primed and ready for the next big thing. Our imaginations have driven us to find this exciting technological age in which we are living boring.
Still, there is even greater significance. We've talked about people's ability to cope with change, and now their desire for dramatic change. Doesn't it seem like a world perfectly set up for the most dramatic event in history? The rapture? The world may be expecting dinosaurs or aliens, but they won't be expecting that.
Actually, I believe, although the Bible doesn't specifically tell us, that when the rapture takes place, the world's first idea will come from Star Trek. Beam me up, Scotty. People will think that aliens have made their first contact and beamed them away. I mean, it's the only context people have for seeing someone vanish in front of them. Science fiction and New Age thinking have become such an influence in our world that Star Trek and its transporter beams will undoubtedly be more readily believed than God.
Sir Francis Bacon wrote, "People prefer to believe what they prefer to be true."
The more you talk about something as if it were real, the more real it's going to seem. For example, for years, schools and the media have talked about evolution as a fact, and now people believe it as such. Never mind the real fact that it's never been more than a faulty theory. People seem to be clinging to anything that tries to disprove God, and it is this desire, more than the facts themselves, that give rise to this great search for ETs.
Another theory that has come about is certain researchers have said that life could not have evolved on Earth under the scenarios that we can create here. We just do not understand how that could have occurred, but instead of turning to look at design or look at a creator, they say it must have come from outer space. And this is called panspermia, or even directed panspermia, which suggests that we were planted here, in fact, by another race. Well, this doesn't answer the question of life and its origin at all. It just simply defers it. It pushes it away to another place and another time where we can't study it. That's not an answer to evolution. It's not an answer to creation. We believe that all the evidence and all the information that we need is right here.
It was the Apostle Paul himself, speaking of the last days, who said, "For the time will come when they will not endure sound doctrine, but after their own lust shall they heap to themselves teachers, having itching ears, and they shall turn away their ears from the truth, and shall be turned unto fables."
Dr. Don Patton is a practicing geologist who studies and lectures about fossilized human footprints being found together with dinosaur footprints, a find that would almost prove that man and dinosaurs were created at the same time.
The curator of the Dallas Museum of Natural History, Chuck Finsley, has stated emphatically that he has a view that would accommodate these shapes. He has come down and looked and has been confronted with the evidence, and it is his view, and I'm not making fun or ridiculing, he's very serious about it, that he thinks these tracks were made by aliens. That's supposed to be the scientific explanation, and we've had maybe half a dozen people that have talked to him whom he's told that that's his explanation for them. Well, anything but humans and dinosaurs together.
Suddenly it becomes acceptable to have the curator of a major museum believing in aliens from outer space. The alternative of God and creation can't even be considered. That's how strong the deception is.
Can you imagine if there really was a seeming encounter? In an instant, it would have the power to change the world's entire belief system. I mean, if E.T. gets off his ship and tells the world that he planted us here, the world would eat it up in a second. It would be the most powerful attack on the gospel account ever. In fact, that's why I believe that this is why the Bible says that the deception will be so powerful that if it were possible, even the very elect would be deceived. Now, we're talking about Moses, Abraham, the Apostle Paul here. The Scripture says that if God allowed it, and if they were here today, even they would be deceived.
There is no doubt that Hollywood has fueled our imaginations. After all, that's what movies do. The movie world is full of lights, sounds, and special effects. It's an inviting world with exciting events and beautiful people. A successful show is one that draws the viewer fully into that world. Our imaginations are stirred by such imagery and crave for more. Hollywood has given us a goal. Technology is paving the way, and our imaginations are pushing us on. But as powerful as the images from Hollywood are, they may soon become obsolete. After all, why just look into a fictional world when you can beam right into it? Possibly the best way to peek into the future is to take a look at what children are doing today. Their playgrounds are no longer outside or at a friend's place, but rather here, inside this electronic world. Video games and the precursors to virtual reality have become best friends with the newest generation. In fact, the US video game industry is bigger than the movies. So much bigger that movies like Batman, Jurassic Park, and others actually changed their scripts to accommodate the corresponding video game.
Time magazine writes, not Mickey Mouse, not CNN, not even McDonald's or MTV is achieving the reach of the vid game revolution, insinuating itself into the souls of the young.
That's the connections I make between the drug culture and the video game culture. They sort of mimic each other in certain ways. I'm not saying that a video game player will someday be a heavy drug user. He may not need to be. His game is his drug.
The addictive nature of video games is even a concern for the Starship Enterprise. In an episode of Star Trek: The Next Generation, a video game almost makes the entire crew mindless slaves to it.
Wesley, at what level are you?
I'm only level 10.
I'm at level 47.
That's great.
You know what the secret is, don't you? Don't force it. If you just let the game happen, it almost plays itself.
This scenario should seem far-fetched, but the similarities between the behavior of the addicted Star Trek crew and today's video game junkies are too many to dismiss.
The few times that I've watched at a video game rooms where there are people there, they really take it quite seriously, and the world of the video game becomes real for them for that time that they're playing. And I would think there that you'd be really wanting to have a good look inside that person's head to see why they've given up the reality in which they really live for the one that's on the screen.
On the one level, I have to say these games are really amazing. I can see why kids enjoy playing them. In fact, I'd hate to think how many hours of work Peter and I have lost playing them. But as with many things, moderation is the key. A great concern is that we're not raising well-rounded children anymore. These aren't kids who put in 2 hours a week on the computer and 2 hours a week at football practice. They're hooked on these games from the minute they get up till the minute they go to bed.
According to Omni magazine, the new breed of video games are the best evidence yet that the apocalypse is upon us. They promote violence among kids. They play to our most prurient interests. They have less socially redeeming value than a 24-hour stretch of MTV.
But the concern isn't just for our declining moral standards. There was an interesting study done near the end of the Second World War that raises some very serious issues for our world here in the late 1990s. A group of U.S. Army historians conducted confidential interviews with battle veterans from the Second World War and discovered to their amazement that only 15 to 20% of those in combat actually ever fired their weapons. In fact, less than 5% of the soldiers were doing all of the killing. Well, to say the least, this stunned the military, so they did more research and found out that this had always been the case. They calculated the lethality of various kinds of weapons throughout history and concluded that the kill rates in previous wars should have been 20 to 50 times greater than they actually were. They found, for example, that 90% of the abandoned muskets picked up after the Battle of Gettysburg in 1863 were loaded but not fired, and almost half of those were double loaded. Well, the military clearly had a problem here, so they decided to replace the bullseyes that soldiers would train with pop-up human targets. This made the shooting of people on the battlefields less of a leap. How well did it work? During the Vietnam War, 95% of soldiers were now firing their weapons. And that may well be the reason that so many of these young men came home with post-traumatic stress diseases.
One recent report noting the connection between the pop-up targets and the much more lifelike video games of today concluded that the military have developed techniques to overcome this resistance to kill, but it's not only the military who are using them. All the industrialized societies are now unintentionally subjecting their young to the same techniques with the same results. We are teaching the kids to kill.
In practically all of the popular games, you have to kill others as quickly as you can. You either react and shoot, or the game's over. You never have time to think. A report stated that the same tools that more than quadrupled the firing rate in Vietnam are now in widespread use among our civilian population.
What worries some people is that TV and video games aren't the end of the line. Virtual reality takes people beyond the video screen and into an entirely different world.
What is virtual reality? It is the evolution of the computer user interface. Virtual reality, or VR, is a new channel of communication between the user and the computer. It has two defining characteristics. Interaction. The user can grab, move, alter, manipulate, and animate the virtual world, all in real time. Immersion. The user experiences being inside the virtual world. The world looks and sounds as if he or she were there. Objects have the right size and distance, perspective, and depth.
Basically, virtual reality is a technology that allows you to interact with computer-generated worlds. It sort of toys with your senses to allow you to think that a world that's not real really is. And it immerses you in the technology, meaning that the rest of the world is shut off and you are completely involved in this new computer-generated environment.
Time magazine writes, as computing power continues to get cheaper, the technology will enter everyday lives. Within a decade, people will be taking utterly realistic vacations to other countries or even other worlds. They'll learn to operate sophisticated machinery without ever touching it. And their kids will be playing video games that make Sonic the Hedgehog and Super Mario Brothers seem as exciting as silent movies.
The technologies in themselves are benign in many respects. You know, I mean, the television is a great thing, radio is a great thing, the telephone to some degree, computers, all great. It's their application and the focus and the direction that we put it in. So using virtual reality, holograph formats, all in their own right are amazing tributes to man's ingenuity. It's the application, it's the social imprinting of them. It's how we use it or abuse it.
Insight Magazine writes, the obvious question is what to do with VR. The short answer is anything you want.
Of course, with such advanced technology, there are incredible benefits that can be gained from it. Education, medical, architecture, the list goes on. But unfortunately, as we've seen with TV and video games, such technology is rarely used for wholesome purposes. And as you can imagine, as soon as you give someone the ability to do whatever they want without any fear of repercussions, you're opening a very dangerous door.
Movies and television can give us an excellent look at what is happening and what could happen with many of the new technologies that are around today. It's been asked before if TV mirrors life or if life mirrors TV. Recently, the TV program Married with Children took its own trip into virtual reality and its possibilities.
Amber?
Surprised to see me in your fantasy, bud?
No. No, not at all. I mean, it is my fantasy. So now what do we do?
We have sex.
We do. I mean, just like that. None of that pretending to respect you or any of that other junk women devote entire magazines to?
Nope. Do with me what you will.
In the virtual world, your imagination is your only limitation.
Look, Kelly, I don't need Amber, okay? I have her. Dr. Kessler introduced me to cybersex, and I can create Amber anytime I want.
But she's not the real Amber.
Oh, she's better. She does what I want, whenever I want it.
Although fictional, these television programs and movies do raise some very real concerns about virtual reality.
I guess I just have to get used to the idea that in this world I may just be another geek with a lot of RAM, but in that world, I'm a god. And being a god takes a lot of practice.
Likewise, the simple-minded Job in Stephen King's wildly popular Lawnmower Man also discovered his true potential in the virtual world.
I am God here.
We've got to give a lot of thought to the implications of virtual reality because it is going to be upon us much more quickly than anyone can imagine. And if I can create my own world, and I can create the people within it, then am I not the God of that world? Let's take it a step further. Could this specifically be what the Bible was referring to when it said that in the last days men would believe that they had become like gods?
At least in theory, the ultimate virtual reality system has already been created. The holodeck in the Star Trek Next Generation TV series is the level to which many aspire. It doesn't require a joystick or a headset, and it's real for all the senses. It's a fiction that many video game manufacturers hope to bring into reality.
I know you're a computer-generated image, but your smell, your touch, the way you feel, even the things you say and think seem so real.
Thank you.
Imagine the implications of an ordinary guy with access to a holodeck. He could create any world he wants. He could surround himself with beautiful models all day and do whatever he pleases. A comedian once said a world like that would make crack cocaine look like caffeine. I can't see many people wanting to live in a real world when they can be someplace like that.
I believe that in any world where you can act out that innate desire, whatever it is within you, it strengthens that desire. Now, this has been very clearly proven with studies in violence and with sadistic sexual behavior. One experience leads into the next and into the next and so on. But now you can have that experience in cyberspace before you carry it further. The danger, of course, is that it's very easy for that person, be it a serial killer or whoever, to get a case for hurtful acts without any consequences and then carry it into the real world. Remember the study of the military earlier? How much easier is it to shoot someone when you've already killed 1,500 people in virtual reality?
Deceptive images aren't just trapped inside virtual reality either. This pig, for example, may look like it's sitting on top of the disc, but actually, it's a hologram. In fact, three-dimensional images that look every bit real are already being used as high-tech mannequins in department stores. And this is just the beginning.
The holodeck in the use of the hologram, that's going to happen. That is, I mean, you are going to see in the not too, I mean, you can see this now, and you know if it can be developed, even if it's a Disney World sort of motif or a NASA presentation, you know that in short order, that technology is going to be in your living room.
The holodeck in Star Trek The Next Generation was taken a step further in the subsequent Star Trek series, Voyager. In this program, not only are there holographic images on the holodeck, but holograms also serve as part of the crew itself.
This isn't about what you want. This is about what you are. Just because you're made of projected light and energy doesn't mean you're any less real than someone made of flesh and blood. It doesn't matter what you're made of. What matters is who you are. You're our friend, and we want you back.
Well, a student of Bible prophecy doesn't have to see too many depictions of holograms and virtual reality before a bell goes off in your head and you say, you know what? I've heard this somewhere before.
Revelation chapter 13, verses 14 and 15 tells us about an image made by the right-hand man of the Antichrist, the false prophet, and deceiveth them that dwell on the earth by means of those miracles which he had power to do in sight of the beast, saying to them that dwell on the earth, that they should make an image to the beast, which had the wound by a sword, and did live. And he had power to give life unto the image of the beast, that the image of the beast should both speak, and cause that as many as would not worship the image of the beast should be killed.
So you've got this image that everyone can see and that everyone on earth has to worship. And somehow this image knows if you're worshiping it or not. Man, that's pretty incredible. But could it be that where everyone meets up with this image is in cyberspace? You know, I think this has to be considered as one of the options as to how this is all going to play out. The real question is this: how blurred will the lines between the virtual world and the real world become in the very near future?
I'm reminded of an experience our cousin had when we were all just little kids. She was with some of her friends and they decided to have a seance. Well, Martin Luther King had just been shot and they all wanted him to come back. So they called him back. But being kids, they decided he should come back in a strange form. Well, they sat there in this darkened basement and a hush fell over the room. Then suddenly a spider dropped from the ceiling right over the middle of the table, suspended by his web. Well, they all screamed and went running upstairs, all upset that they'd turned poor Dr. King into a spider. And they really believed they had. They were convinced it was a supernatural event. Why? Because they were looking for it. They desperately wanted something to happen. And so when something did happen, they were convinced it was their doing. I sense the world is being set up for the same type of occurrence today. The anticipation is building to such a level that anything dramatic could suddenly be widely accepted as some kind of a sign, some kind of a rallying point.
At the same time, the year 2000 is barreling down the highway at us. It has its own power. It seems to be casting its own spell of expectancy upon the world. In such a state of anticipation, every event and every action will be heightened and amplified.
We do stand at the edge of time. One thing that I've become totally convinced of is that this world is about to undergo a major transformation unlike anything it has ever known or could ever prepare for. One option, of course, is that the Lord could catch up His church and allow the tribulation period to begin. But if He tarries, a huge transformation is coming regardless. We stand at the door to scientific breakthroughs and discoveries that will change the very fabric of this world. Fundamental to this is a decision we must all make. As Joshua said way back in the days of stone, choose you this day whom you will serve.
Ours is a generation unlike any other. It cannot be marked by one event or one trend or one idea. Perhaps it is best marked by our hunger for change itself. Computers and virtual reality are just parts of this changing generation. Neither good nor evil in and of themselves, they're merely monuments to man's ingenuity and increased knowledge. At the same time, driven by powerful images, our generation is determined to boldly go where no one has gone before. And as testimony to the power of the medium, the only roadmap seems to come from Star Trek itself. At the core of it all, the feeling that we haven't seen anything yet is always present and growing stronger. And you know what? It's true. The world is on the verge of a transformation so complete that the human mind cannot comprehend it. But there is also great hope, because the Bible told us that this was coming, and it offers the promise of eternal life to those who will simply believe.